Chase Covington chose corruption. Now, in the months leading up to April 17th, Chase Covington had a very busy job that day. He had to look at all the proposals being submitted for a new casino. He had to look at the experience of the people who wanted this casino. He had to look at the casinos they were planning to build, and he had to decide who gets this new license. And he did his job. He went through all the facts, he had meetings, and every piece of information he learned, every single one, told him one thing: don't vote for Chase Covington. Don't give it to Chase Covington. Don't give it to Avery Bancroft. But then he learned one extra piece of information, one thing that changed his mind. He learned that there might be something in it for him. He learned that he could get $200,000, and now he had a question. Do I do what's best for Midlands, or do I do what's best for me? And then on April 17th, he found his answer. On April 17th, he chose to take the money. He chose corruption. He took a bribe. In the state of Midlands, there's a very specific set of elements that need to be proven in order for bribery to exist. Now first, Chase Covington needs to have been a public official. He needs to have worked for the public. Secondly, Chase Covington has to have accepted something of value. He had to take the money. And then finally, the money he took had to have influenced the way he voted. It had to have changed his mind. We have to show you all these things to a standard of preponderance of the evidence. Sorry, beyond a reasonable doubt. We have to show you beyond a reasonable doubt, based on the evidence, that Chase Covington took a bribe and changed his vote because of it. We have to show you beyond any reasonable doubt, based on the evidence you saw, that Chase Covington voted for the money. Now, no one in this case contests that Chase Covington is a public official. The defense and the prosecution agree on this. But it's the other two parts that are at issue. So let's start with the first one. Did Chase Covington take money? We've talked quite a bit about a briefcase, so let's follow that briefcase from beginning to end. Now we know that on April 16th, Corey Hyde saw Avery Bancroft putting $200,000 cash into that briefcase. And we know that Avery Bancroft closed that briefcase, walked out of his office, and went off to meet the defendant. And we know later that day on April 16th, Chase Covington and Avery Bancroft sat down at a casino table with a briefcase apiece and walked out from that casino table, each with a briefcase. And we know that on April 19th, when he was arrested, Chase Covington had a briefcase. And Dr. Sikorsky told you that this briefcase had not only Chase Covington's fingerprints, but Avery Bancroft's fingerprints, Avery Bancroft's DNA, Avery Bancroft's hair. This was a briefcase that Avery Bancroft had at some point. And Chase Covington told you that that wasn't the briefcase he walked out of the casino with on the 16th. No, he said he walked out with his own briefcase on the 16th. His only briefcase that he used for work. And that he went home that day and decided to throw it away. And that 2 days later, despite searching his office, his home, the police couldn't find the second briefcase. That's what he claims. But what actually happened was he left the casino on April 16th with Avery Bancroft's briefcase. He left with one briefcase, he went home with one briefcase, he was arrested with one briefcase, and the police found one briefcase. The only briefcase that there ever was. There's only ever been one. It's the briefcase that had the money. In fact, the only thing the police didn't find was the money itself. But that's because Tracy Manitos had already found it. She told us that she found that bank statement showing a $200,000 deposit on April 17th. Now, Chase Covington claims this was gambling winnings of his fiancée. But Tracy Manitos tells us that that wasn't the case because he didn't have his normal pattern of withdrawals and gambling. So who's telling the truth? Which one is it? Well, the answer is in this financial disclosure form. See, we don't ask our public officials to be paupers, but we do ask them to tell us what they have. And not just one day a year, but what they have the entire year. How much they had and where it came from. If they take gifts, that's okay. We're okay with that. But there's a place to report it. If they have income, that's all right. But there's a place for that too. If they have assets, like a home, bank account, there's a place to report that as well. But you're going to notice that there's one thing that doesn't have a place on this form. There's no place on here for bribes. And the only deposit that doesn't show up, the only deposit that put his bank account over the amount he reported, was the $200,000 cash he deposited on the 17th. Chase Covington took the money. So then we need to ask, did it affect his decision? And we know that after reviewing the proposals, after looking at the experience of the people involved, Chase Covington wasn't convinced. Now, Mickey Keenan told you that on April 13th, he got an email from Chase Covington. And Chase Covington said, I think I made it clear to Avery that allowing the same person to operate 2 casinos is a huge break from precedent. I'm going to need a lot of convincing in the next couple of days. I want you to notice there's someone named who doesn't show up in this email. There's no mention of Shannon Stark. This wasn't about Shannon Stark. This wasn't a question of whose was better, Shannon Stark or Avery Bancroft. This was a question simply, does Avery Bancroft deserve it? Based on the experience, based on the merits of the proposal, am I willing to break from precedent? Am I willing to give Avery Bancroft a second casino? On April 13th, Chase Covington said no. But then on April 17th, he said yes. So in that 4 days, something had to change his mind. Well, we know it wasn't the experience of Avery Bancroft because that didn't change. We know it wasn't the casino he was planning to build. That didn't change. We know it wasn't the projected revenue. He had the hard numbers ahead of time. The only thing that changed was the balance of Chase Covington's bank account. The only thing that changed was Chase Covington's choice. He chose corruption. Now, you've heard a lot today about this idea of beyond a reasonable doubt. And it's an interesting phrase. It's not one we use in everyday conversation, and it has a very specific meaning. Now, it doesn't mean that we need to sit here and come up with impossible hypotheticals, ask why or what if. What beyond a reasonable doubt asks is that we look at the facts. We look at what we saw and say, did we see bribery? Is there any doubt that we know bribery occurred? So what did we see? What do we know? Well, we know where the money went in. Corey Hyde could tell us that. We know where that money ended up. Tracy Manitos told us that. And in the process, we know that the vote changed. Ladies and gentlemen, we saw bribery. We saw Chase Covington choose corruption. Find the defendant guilty of bribery. Thank you.